Good afternoon. Welcome to this session on design and sustainability. My name is Todd Breifogel, and I direct the seminars program at the Aspen Institute. And it's my privilege to introduce Michael Spector for this program on denialism, how irrational thinking hinders scientific progress, harms the planet, and threatens our lives, the title of a book that he published last year with Penguin. Spector is a staff writer at The New Yorker, focusing on science, technology, and global public health. Among his other distinctions, he's been awarded the Global Health Council's Excellence in Media Award twice, and also he's the recipient of the Science Journalism Award from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. He'll be speaking for about a half an hour, which will give us time to have our lunch, and then he'll open up for questions. So without further ado, Michael Spector.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm always amazed by being introduced that way. It actually seems better than the sum of the parts, but I appreciate it. I just want to start with a couple pieces of unrelated news that came to me by way of the internets recently. One, there is a pertussis outbreak in California. 1,500 people are known to have become sick so far. 6 are dead. This is spreading around the country, but California is the worst place. Pertussis is also known as whooping cough. It's a preventable disease. People shouldn't get it. The people who died were infants. They were too young to be vaccinated, and they need to rely on something called herd immunity, which is the immunity conferred by the fact that others are vaccinated. And it's a simple idea. It means if I send my kid to school and she's unvaccinated and everyone in her class is, she'll be protected by the herd. When some other people start doing the same thing, the herd doesn't work anymore. And we're having that again and again and again in this country. It's, to my mind, disgraceful, and I'll come back to that. Another piece of unrelated news. A couple weeks ago, 2 Stanford researchers reported that through the use of conventional high-yield agriculture, the type of agriculture many people in this room probably think is evil, since World War II, that agriculture has managed to be responsible for sequestering 590 billion metric tons of CO2 from entering the atmosphere. That's about a third of the greenhouse gas emissions since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. This has not been reported vigorously in the press because it doesn't fit into the world view of sustainability that many people have. And I'll come back to that too. There are some other studies that came out recently that I won't go into in great detail, but they all pretty much say the same thing. Dietary supplements are largely useless unless they're dangerous. There are exceptions, there really are. Vitamin D, sometimes folic acid for pregnant women. There are very few exceptions. But in general, what we take those things for is to make our urine look darker and to enrich the companies who sell the stuff. So those are 3 things that bother me, and the reason they bother me is because I think the reason that they exist is this idea of denialism. And denialism is simply denial writ large. I mean, we all go through denial. We all have things in our life that are uncomfortable, and we ignore them or we pretend they don't happen. And I think that's kind of normal for a while, for a person. But it's not normal if you don't get over it, and it's not normal for a society. It's not normal for an entire society to look at data, to look at truths and facts, and there are such things as truths and facts, and turn away from them because they don't want to hear what those facts really say. So that's really why I wrote that book, and the implications of it are very profound, and I think we sometimes don't think about that. And if you look back to China, not the China that's taking over the world today, but the China that ran the world in the 15th century, in 1421, they had just finished building the Forbidden City. And as they did, a lightning strike destroyed much of it. And the emperor freaked out because he took this as a sign from the gods that he had paid too much attention to mechanical human things. They had the best cartographers, the best navy, the most literate people, the most adventurous people in the world. And he responded by simply calling them all back, by ending the experiment in adventuresomeness that was that country. And what happened was that China went dark for 500 years. 500 years. And there is a presumption, particularly in this country and particularly among a certain type of elite, that because we are gifted, rich, talented, progressive, and advanced, these are self-sustaining ideas. These just, we have been and we will be. And that's not true. And we're starting to see that, and we're going to see it more rapidly. And that is something that I really think none of us want to happen. And so keep that in mind when I talk a bit today. When I talk about food, when I talk about vaccines, it makes people crazy. I've covered abortion wars. I've covered AIDS at the beginning of the epidemic. I covered a war in Chechnya. None of that was as scary or physically dangerous for me as writing about these things. I don't go a day, and I don't mind this, but I don't go a day without someone screaming at me and saying that I am in the employment of a pharmaceutical company or an agricultural company because I believe that genetically engineered food is useful and that it can help, not solve all the problems of the world, but it can help address some of them. That is seen by many progressives as a crime, and it's very disturbing. I was delighted a couple weeks ago to see that the White House chef announced that Michelle Obama's garden is not organic. Yes. And why was I delighted? I eat organic food. I'm a rich Western person. I can afford to. It's fine. But what it mostly was is local. And local food is usually, though not always better, it's usually, though not always more sustainable, it's usually, though not always better for the environment. So the idea that local and organic are the same thing, or that somehow organic is this magical wonderland of food, whereas conventional food is poison, is crazy and it's wrong. And it bespeaks of a lack of knowledge and sophistication about the stuff we put in our mouths every day. And we need to know better. And one of the reasons we need to know better is not about this country. We're all going to continue to eat too much and have too many calories. I think that's pretty clear. But other people aren't as gifted in this respect. There are 1 billion people who go to bed hungry every night, 1 billion. And they have organic food because that's all they have access to. And it isn't totally working for them because they are being blocked from the fruits of science. And they're being blocked from the fruits of science for a lot of reasons, and one of them is us. Because we don't like genetically engineered food. We don't like that stuff. It's rotten. We call it genetically modified food. Now, all the food any of you have ever eaten, all of it, every single grain of rice, is genetically modified. It wasn't in the Garden of Eden. They didn't have cantaloupes there. They didn't have tangerines. They didn't have Christmas trees. We made it all. We made it over 11,000 years of farming, and very smart farming, mixing genomes, figuring out what worked, getting rid of what didn't over time. Genetic engineering is a different way of doing that. It is a more precise way, and it has greater theoretical benefits. And it also has, and this is a part of the sentence no one ever listens to, it has greater theoretical risks. It does. And we need to weigh benefits and risks. And we never do. We don't weigh them. So what you'll see are a lot of people saying, genetically engineered food is too new, we shouldn't eat it. Okay, it's new. It's been grown for 23 years and millions of hectares. There has never been one person on the planet Earth ever shown to have been made sick by eating genetically engineered food. Now, if every single American took 2 aspirin right now, 500 of us would be dead tonight. No question, beyond debate. Does that mean aspirin should be banned? No, it's a fantastic drug. 29 billion aspirin tablets were taken last year in this country. But what it does mean is that everything we do entails risk. And if you get in a car or even one of these golf carts, you can die in it. I mean, you can die swallowing water. We never think of both sides of the fraction. We only think of the risk or the benefit. So people get all worked up about the risk of vaccines. Now, the risk of vaccines has been shown to be remarkably, remarkably small. It doesn't mean it's nothing. It doesn't mean if 200 million people are vaccinated against something, some people won't get sick. But I'll tell you what I can promise If you don't get vaccinated, millions will die. And so we have a situation now in this country where people aren't vaccinating their children against measles. And I'm not talking about dumb folks. I spent a lot of my time arguing with people about this. They all went to Harvard and Yale and fancy schools. They love their children. They think they care about the earth, and they know what's good. And what's bad is these vaccinations, because you get a bunch of vaccinations between the first and second year of life, and then some children develop autism at about the same time, and that is a horrible thing. And when you look at the one and you look at the other, a parent is going to ask, well, what the hell caused this? Why was my totally normal child suddenly sent into some sort of place where he or she is developing in a haywire way? And you look, and vaccines are there. So it makes sense to say, gee, maybe they're the problem. And so that has been explored. It's been explored in about 13 countries, and it's been explored with millions of children. It's not a terribly difficult thing to look at because lots of kids have been vaccinated and lots of kids haven't, especially for measles, mumps, rubella, but for everything. And so you can compare the groups. And when you do that, you'll find that the number of people who develop autism in each of those two branches is almost identical always. If there's been a difference, it's the unvaccinated people who are slightly higher, but it's a statistically insignificant matter. It means nothing. So does this matter? Is this data good enough? Absolutely not. I used to think that if you had a bunch of information and you could explain the information and you could expose people to the information, you were done. Especially smart people like everyone in this room. I mean, you just tell them the information and they'll see. That is absolutely untrue. It is absolutely untrue that data is enough to convince people that vaccinations are safe. So I spoke at TED this year, and I talked about vaccines, and afterwards some guy came up to me and said, I really liked your talk, it was great, but I'm not going to vaccinate my kid until he's 2, because he's too young to handle that. I'm like, well, I hope the kid doesn't die before he's 2, because some kids will die before they're 2 if they're not vaccinated. And this is something that we don't seem to accept or understand. So people say, polio, I'm not going to, why would we vaccinate our children against a disease that we don't know anything about anymore? Now, our parents wouldn't let my parents couldn't go swimming in the summer at pools because it was too dangerous, because polio was such a risk. We don't even know about that now. We have physicians who don't know about it. We have physicians who've never seen measles. People spend billions of dollars trying to vaccinate Africans, Asians, against these diseases that we're not even vaccinating our kids for now. And you know what? It's made a big difference. 6 years ago, 750,000 people in this world died of measles. That's a lot of people. Last year, it was 185,000. Now, that's still a lot of people. That's an amazing number of people dying of a very preventable disease, but none of them died here. None of them died knowing Jenny McCarthy. So it's fine. We can skip that because we haven't seen measles. And I don't want to be one of these people who says, maybe when polio comes back and we have a little polio epidemic, people will understand. And there are lots of people out there who say that. And that scares me because it can come back. There's been polio outbreaks in Eastern Europe, in Africa, in Afghanistan. They have airplanes in those places. And if they fly here and they sit next to you and you're unvaccinated, you can get sick. It's not, viruses don't care who you are. They're not nice or not nice. They're just viruses. And luckily, we have been able to figure out a way to battle many of those viruses with remarkable success. And it's very difficult to watch us walk away from that. And increasingly we are. And I think it's scary. Now, there is a two-word phrase that is used a lot, and when put together, they're my two least favorite words in the English language. Precautionary principle. I'm fine with the words separately. It's just when they're together. So what does that mean? Well, it means something. And what it means is that we ought not to go forward with the scientific endeavor unless we can be sure it's safe. And we need to know that it's safe in order to do it. So now, that seems kind of reasonable. But the precautionary principle, when taken to its extremes, means no innovation can occur on this planet because you can't try anything new. We wouldn't have X-rays if we employed the precautionary principle, or antibiotics, or radios or airplanes or the type of milk that you can drink that won't kill you. And that's a really important thing, because I was in the Union Square Market in New York recently, and some guy, like a drug dealer, was like, hey, what are you selling? He said, well, I'm selling milk. I said, really? Where is it? He said, well, I don't have it here. I'm like, okay. Where do you have it? He said, well, how much do you want? I'm like, well, I don't know, what is it, like a kilo? Or, I felt like I was back in college. It turned, he's selling raw milk. Raw milk is something that a certain group of people think is wonderful. It kills you. It makes you sick. It was a triumph of modern life that we were able to figure out a way for children to consume milk that isn't raw milk. So to go to the fancy market where all my friends shop in New York and have them charge me a ridiculous sum of money for something that I could give to my niece so that she could die seems a little backward to me. And, it's a little funny, but it would be more funny if it wasn't true. But why do we do that? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why is that we hate big science? We hate big government. We totally hate big pharma. But we're fine with big placebo. We love that. We love the sort of old McDonald fantasy, the idea that we could know our chickens. Most of us know meat from, it comes to you on a plate, or maybe we go to a grocery store and it's wrapped in saran wrap. And there are problems with that. And we grow food in difficult and weird and unpleasant ways that haven't been good for us. But that isn't a scientific issue. That's a societal issue. And we need to decide what we want in this world and then pursue it. And science can help us do that. So when we oppose genetically engineered food, we're not just saying don't dump a lot of pesticides on a lot of soybeans in Ohio or the other places in the Midwest. What we actually are saying is don't put vitamin A into rice. Vitamin A rice is something that was invented by a guy named Ingo Petroikis I should know this, but about 13, 15 years ago. It's a miracle. The World Bank has suggested that if India alone had vitamin A rice, it would save 1.5 million years of human lives lost every year. It's something people don't get. It's not in the ground in India. It's not in the ground in the Philippines. It's not in the ground anywhere because it has been so viciously and virulently opposed that we've only just gone ahead, I think, with field trials. Now, vitamin A rice is engineering vitamin A into a kernel of rice. That's what it is. Greenpeace said, well, you can't do that. It's unnatural. There are other ways to get vitamin A. If you shop at Whole Foods, there are other ways to get vitamin A. But if you live in sub-Saharan Africa, sometimes there aren't. And the idea that rich people in America and Europe, and that's what it is, are dictating their moral principles so that Africans who are starving can't have something that will make them healthy is really repugnant to me. And it happens all the time. Cassava is something that is consumed by, I think, almost 1 billion people. It's a staple. It's a staple like rice. It's a bunch of carbohydrates. It's not useful food. It doesn't have micronutrients. It doesn't have things like vitamin A. It's missing protein. And so, funded by the Gates Foundation, a bunch of scientists across the world have said, let's engineer that stuff into cassava, and they've been extremely successful in doing so, and they're still working on it, and they're working on lots of other things like that. I don't know if that's going to get in the ground. And the reason I don't know it is because I was in India recently, and there was a little disaster called brinjal. Does anyone know? You guys probably don't know what brinjal is. It's eggplant. They call it by a different name in every country. I don't know what that's about. But so eggplant's a really important crop in India. And genetically engineered eggplant could use less insecticide. There would be less pesticide poisonings. It would be easier to grow in difficult ground. And it went through 7 layers of regulatory hurdles in India, which has a pretty rigorous regulatory system for this kind of stuff. It wasn't just Monsanto saying, hey, we're going to slip this by you. It was nothing like that. And it was approved the first time and the second time and the third time and the fourth time and the fifth time and the sixth time and the seventh time. And then when it was time to be put into ground, the environmental minister said, whoa, we don't know enough about this stuff. And it's banned because we need to find out more. We need to find out more about that product while people die because they can't have that product. And people are constantly saying this genetically engineered food, it's not organic, it's not healthy. So since we probably all care about sustainability and we care about the environment, I'm thinking, what does that mean? Well, less water use, less insecticide use, less energy use to put stuff in the ground. All those things are hallmarks of genetically engineered products. Now, there are problems with those products. There are problems with all seeds. And some of those problems are intellectual, ethical, social. It's a question of who owns seeds. Those are things we can deal with. Those are patent things. Those are legal things. We can deal with laws. It's not a science issue because science isn't a company. It's not a country. It's not even an idea. It's a process. And it's a process that has taken us since the Enlightenment to a place where we are now. And it's a pretty damn good place because my grandfather was dead when he was my age. And I'm alive. And, our advancement has been so rapid, it has been so remarkable that I think we take it for granted. And we take it for granted in this country, and we take it for granted in Europe. You can't take it for granted in a lot of the world because those folks live on $1 a day, and they're just trying to get through the day. That's the goal of a lot of people on this planet, to make it to the next day. And we have the strength and the power to help them. And the idea that we don't help them is really very scary. And one of the things that bothers me about it is I think that we all do want to help them. And some of the reason we don't is because of misguided notions of what these vehicles are, what they can do, and what they can't do. Because one of our problems here is that we tend to solve every problem with genetics. We've cured every disease. Of course, the press has nothing to do with this. But every disease is cured by some new invention. Every drought is going to be fixed by a new crop. And the truth is, those things have not yet fully panned out because it takes a long time. It's been 50 years since they figured out DNA, and it's going to be another, fill in the blank, 10, 15, 20, 50 before it's extremely useful to everyone. But it's been extremely useful to lots of people already. It's just not solving all our problems because our problems are complex, because we're complex. So if we ask more of science than it can give, we tend to get disappointed. And we've done that. We've gotten disappointed with science. We've gotten disappointed with government. We've gotten disappointed with leadership. We don't trust institutions anymore. And I don't blame us. Institutions are difficult to trust. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be skeptical. It just means we should ask a lot of questions. But when we get answers that are filled with facts, when we get answers that say 50 million people have had the H1N1 flu viral shot and no one has been killed by it, yet thousands have already died of this flu and it was a mild flu. That's an answer that we ought to factor into our head in one way, and that way is to give our kids the damn shot. Now, next week they're going to throw 40 million doses of that vaccine in the toilet because they will have expired. Now, some of that has to do with the fact that it wasn't as virulent as we thought. And some of it has to do with the fact that one shot worked when people thought two would be needed. But a lot of it has to do with the fact that 43% of this country said they wouldn't get that vaccine. They wouldn't get a highly effective, safe vaccine against a novel virus. What do you want? To me, it's like standing in an open field and watching a bomb come down on you and saying, I'm not going to get out of the way. That bomb's not going to hit me. And it won't. It didn't hit us this time. And it didn't hit us with avian influenza. And it didn't hit us with SARS badly. It did hit the people who died. But I will tell you something with absolute certainty. It will hit us. There will be a pandemic. Maybe next week. Maybe 27 years from now. We don't know. But the cycle of existence on this planet makes it very clear that viruses evolve and they mutate in odd ways. And some of those ways, from time to time, are lethal. And we have done, I shouldn't say we, Seth Berkley's in the audience. People like he and others have done remarkable things to prepare us for that so that we can make vaccines rapidly, so that we can respond to our greatest threats. You know how we make our vaccines now? We grow them in eggs in Pennsylvania. We've been doing that since 1947. I can download whatever music my child records this afternoon with her high school band on my iPhone, and we're growing vaccines in eggs in Pennsylvania. There's something wrong with that. And one of the things that's wrong with it is people are afraid to do it any other way. And this is, I just want to leave you with this, because the next great opportunity, and I believe opportunity for fear as well, is synthetic biology. And what I mean by that is creating new organisms whole cloth out of a computer, out of chemicals, that can do great things. It's very scary. It's extremely scary to think of that. It's Frankensteinian. And it ought to be scary, and we ought to think long and hard about these things. We ought to have conversations, which we never do have, about the risks of that and the benefits. Now, some of the benefits in some cases have already been demonstrated. There's something called artemisinin. It's the most powerful and important anti-malaria drug. It's grown in Asia. It's grown in Africa. Depends on the weather. It's difficult. You don't get it out of the ground rapidly enough. It turns into cyanide. It's a very difficult crop to harvest, and we need it desperately. Jay Kiesling and a bunch of other scientists out in California figured out a way to make it. Just make it out of whole chemicals. And they can make enough of that stuff in a vat so that everyone in the world who needs artemisinin will have artemisinin. And that artemisinin will be pure. It will be regulated, it won't be counterfeit, and it can be made cheap because we have the ability in this world to sell things at a price that's acceptable. And that is a remarkable achievement of synthetic biology. Another achievement, I think we could all agree, is if we could power our factories and our cars with things that don't burn greenhouse gases, but that grow out of sugar and algae, and that we can do it locally so that we don't have to stick giant pipes in the ground or offshore. Those are things we need to do. We can't talk about maybe anymore. We need to solve this problem. We're not going to solve the problem the way that we're going about it. We're going to need new answers. And my biggest concern is, and again, I want to stress, these are not miraculous. These aren't going to solve everything. Science goes maybe forward 4 steps and back 1 step. Then it goes 3 steps and back 2 steps. But it goes forward. In the end, it goes forward, and we need to push it forward. We need to see what's good and accept that and look at what's bad or dangerous and say, we don't want that. But we don't do any of that. We just lurch forward without making decisions, and that's our decision. And then we say, gee, these things are scary. Genetically engineered food is scary, even though it's never caused any danger to any human being, because we don't understand, and we hear a lot of bad stuff. And the environment is something we care about, and isn't that ruining the environment? And all of this is crap. But we don't sit and talk about it. And we need to do that in the future because we're running out of time. I don't think, you can think global warming isn't a problem. The algorithms for search have been based on popularity mostly. The questions that are asked are the ones, and how they're related to others are the ones that come first. And that's been very effective, and I think we're all amazed at what we can find in terms of information rapidly. I think the next level of search is trying to evaluate the value of those things. And there are ways to do that, and I know some people at Google are doing that. I know some people at that other company, what's it called, Something Soft, are doing it. And, this is a process. But I think search will help us. But right now, we're out there in a canoe in a sea, and it's very difficult, I agree. I also think, I hate to say this, but, talk to educated people. Somehow now we think of doctors as just another source of information. They're just like anyone else. And sometimes that's true, and I'm not saying just do what your doctor says, but some people have been trained and studied and educated, and we ought to seek those folks out and listen to what they say and not dismiss what they say because we don't like what they say.
Peter Westcott, I'm a local educator. How do you do a cost-benefit analysis when the chance of something going wrong is so small, but the outcome when it goes wrong is so huge? And I'd give the Gulf oil spill as an example.
Yeah, it's a legitimate question, but I would turn it around and say, people probably aren't going to get polio. It's not likely to get polio in this country and die from it at this point. But if you get it, you're really dead. or crippled for life. And the idea that you would not do something that could prevent that is really kind of telling to me. So I think, again, when it comes to cost-benefit analysis, you have to think, what are the risks? What are the benefits? And the risks mean, like, how likely is something to happen? And if it's, we get in a car every day and we put a seatbelt on. Now, we're mostly not likely to have a car accident. And if we do, we're not likely to have a terrible one. That's what the data shows. But if we do have a terrible one, we really want that seatbelt on. And that, to me, is what cost-benefit says. It says, do what you can to protect yourself from risk within a meaningful context. And I think we do that instinctively. I mean, I do.
Over here, if that's all right. John?
Okay, you're next.
Sorry, am I jumping in?
It's okay.
Okay.
She can
Just
be
a
next.
real quick one. John Horton, what's the likelihood, do you think, we'll look back in, say, 15 or 20 years and laugh at concepts like organic food at the grocery store and Whole Foods grocery stores? Thank you.
I'd love to be able to say the likelihood is high, but are you kidding? I mean, marketing is a really powerful tool, and that's what this stuff is. And I don't think we will look back. And also, there have been some positive impacts of the organic movement, and having little farms and knowing about your food and being in contact with the produce and the producers. That's all great. It's worth knowing that the people who own most of the organic produce in this country and sell it are also the people who own most of the food that you don't want to buy, because Kellogg's is happy to sell you something for twice what you would pay for it if that's what if you just slap the word natural or organic on it. And that's what happens. So, I don't know. I'd like to think, the biggest salespeople of organic food in this country is a small firm called Walmart. They sell more by far than anyone else. So I don't know. I don't know if we're going to be looking back soon. Did you have a question over there?
Hi, Michael. Thank you for being here. My name is Carmela Lewis from Denver, Colorado.
Thanks.
And for those of us that might have been here last year, we had wonderful presentations on health and the industry. And there were a lot of doctors here. One who, some of you who were here last year, was Deepak Chopra. And I think the message that he brought across, which I think is great for all of us to keep in mind, is that it's choice, as you were saying. And the mind, I feel, for somebody who takes 0 pills, does not go to doctors, I think it's critically important that we listen to our body, as he told us, and the body tells you. He mentioned that the body is its own natural pharmacy.
Yeah,
So.
I couldn't possibly disagree with that more. I'm going to listen to data, not to Deepak Chopra or Oprah or Larry King. I'm going to listen to what the statistics tell me. So if I'm feeling good, but I have liver cancer, I'm going to want to take the drugs. I'm not going to want to, do what Deepak thinks I had to do. Yes, you in the back there.
And maybe you can say something about the role religion plays in all of this. And I'll take HIV as a case. As you know, we've had a remarkable invention of drugs. We now have more drugs to treat HIV than all of the diseases put together. And those are getting out to other parts of the world. People are paying attention. At the same time, we said the way to stop HIV is abstinence. And we said that's the only way we should do it, and we pushed countries to adopt that, even though the data said exactly the opposite. And of course, now there's many, many more infections than people we put on treatment. A lot of that was clothed in religion, the anti-homosexuality movement, et cetera. Say something about that.
I thought you were my friend. Well, first of all, is it enough to just say the Bush administration was bad and leave it at that? No. What I don't want to say is religion is the source of all the evil. I don't believe that. I think you can be religious and also be statistically relevant, intelligent, and look at data. What happened with abstinence was one of the great crimes of the late 20th century, and it's not ending. And it's education, really, and it's education within religions. I mean, I can't believe that sophisticated people, including sophisticated Catholics, are going to tell poor, dying people that they should use abstinence, because Sarah Palin's daughter tried that. It didn't work for her. Sorry, that was mean. So I guess my answer to that is I don't want to say that religion is the problem, but a certain type of fundamental religious approach is a big part of the problem. That's for sure.
Yeah, actually, my question, I'm Kara Carlisle with the Kellogg Foundation, and I won't comment and support anything around some of the dietary issues with Kellogg, some of their products, although they have some really great products as well. They own Kashi, if you didn't know that, which is all natural.
But you won't mention any of that. Yeah, okay.
But I won't mention any of that. But I actually was really wanting to push on this idea of religion and the idea of the integration between public education, because I actually do believe, and I actually have a divinity degree. I went through the religious track, but actually found a lot of losses in terms of the integration of science and advancement, and related to sort of religion and religious ideology. And so there seems to be a pretty big disconnect between the consciousness raising that you describe, a thing that would help us propel science forward, and sort of the religion and the balkanization that happens around what I consider more tribalism. And so, of course, you mentioned Dawkins. Of course, I read Dawkins quite a bit. I'm just trying to figure out where you see the entry points in between integrating science with religion, which we are a religious society and becoming more so with immigration in a lot of ways, and how you see U.S. scientific advancement based on what I think is going to be a more religious society in many ways because of immigration versus less religious societies like in Europe.
I guess maybe I'm wrong about this. I don't see this as a big a problem as you do. First of all, less religious societies in Europe, they aren't doing the science we're doing, and they're certainly not doing the science that India is doing. There are many religious countries out there who are doing fantastic technological work. I think it can be presented as something that will further humanity. I don't think it needs to be presented as something that will hold us back and hem in our religious views. And like I said before, if you're an extremist, yeah, that's a problem. But most people aren't extremists. And I don't think most people who just get up and believe in God, and I should say I'm totally not one of those people, but there are a lot of them out there. Some of you may be in this room. I don't think that those are people who are anti-science. I don't think that I haven't seen that preventing science except in extreme cases.
I have a question. My name's Ann Tate. I'm a professor at the Rhode Island School of Design. And it seems to me that the question here is not so much about our relationship to science, but our relationship to information generally. That you've talked about statistics and needing to do a cost-benefit analysis, but there are a lot of issues in this country, particularly over the last, we've been seeing in the last political cycle, for instance, where the relationship to facts or information generally is so colored by, the viewpoint that someone takes going in. It may be that there's, lefties afraid of medicine who don't want to vaccinate their kids, and there's people on the right who don't want to believe that Obama is an American. But the question is, how do we deal with this issue of our relationship to information, which would seem to be the basis for any civil discourse?
Well, first of all, you point out a good point. In my book, I write about vaccines, and I write about vitamins, and I write about technology. And so I've had people come up to me and say, I agree with this is great, but I hate this other part. And all I'm trying to say is we need to have a system. These are standard ideas that we can look at data and evaluate the data in certain ways. Sometimes it's not even that hard. And I guess one of the requirements of an educated mind is that you be able to evaluate two ideas, that you be able to look at something and decide what its merit is. And I think we've walked away from that. And that is, I'm sorry, you're at a university, that's your fault. No, but really, I think this goes back to education. It is a fundamental issue. And I think when it comes to science, we take stuff for granted. We all want the iPhone 4, but we don't necessarily want the vaccine. And we don't see these things as of a piece. We don't see that we're moving rapidly in technology, and we care about that, and we crave that. But we also got where we were because of these basic fundamental scientific achievements. And there's no more basic fundamental scientific achievement in the history of the world, except maybe clean water, than vaccinations. None. Zero.
I'm Camilla Smith from San Francisco, and it seems to me that we as a public, especially those of us who are not currently in the STEM programs, are so undereducated in science, and particularly in biology. And what are we going to do about it?
Well, one of the things people can do, this sounds so stupid, is use their common sense. Like lots of times people say to me, well, how can you evaluate a study that you read in the paper that says something is good or something is bad? Well, if you look at that study, even one study, you can, was it a study with 27 people in one place? Was it a study with 27,000 carried out in 17 institutions over 11 years? Did it happen once, or did it happen lots of times? Is it completely different than the past, or is it kind of an add-on or a slight difference? These are things that aren't that hard to discern, and I think we need to just think that way. I don't think we do think that way. I think we have a sort of weird paradox where we have the carryover from the doctor tell me what to do school married with the I hate authority school. And the result is as you see it. Okay. I don't know when we're supposed to stop, but 5 minutes. Okay, we can continue on.
Antoine van Akmal, Emerging Markets Management. You gave one example in India of the environmental minister stopping a form of genetically engineered foods, which is obviously something that has massive implications. Are there other examples where the environmental movement, trying to do the best thing, is actually stopping science?
Do you have 100 years?
Well,
yes.
Give me a few.
Well, one of them is, this is an older one, but the country of Zambia refused the import of genetically engineered foods a few years ago because they were convinced by environmentalists and their friends in Europe that it was dangerous to bring those into the country. Those people were literally starving to death, and they turned away boatloads of grain because it's genetically engineered. So that's one. There are others. Greenpeace is out there saying you can't use cassava, the thing I mentioned, because it's dangerous. What's really dangerous is starving to death. That's dangerous. And I don't say that glibly, but again, it's a risk thing. You have to look at what the possible benefits are and what the risks are. And when it comes to Africa, I think you could have some of the worst risks in the world, and it would actually be worth it. But a lot of the environmental community has staked its ground on this sort of organic principle, and I've never understood why organics and genetically engineered products need to be separate. I've never understood that, and I know there's some other people trying. There's a woman named Pam Ronald who wrote a book called Tomorrow's Table with her husband, Raul Adamchuk. She is the head of plant genetics at Davis. He's an organic farmer. Actually, that is the best book I've ever read on the attempt to marry these things and the rational need to marry these things. It's crazy not to have both. But the idea that you're one or the other is nuts. But I think, we're in a polarized society, and that's the way we approach everything, and we need to move away from that. Yeah, sure. I don't know. The mic will come to you. I'm told.
As a modestly informed consumer.
Who says? Oh, no, just kidding.
What do you do when you have conflicting advice from conflicting studies? Let me give you an example. There was a study just reported in the Wall Street Journal recently on statins. And the result was, I think it was 9,000 participants in Northern Europe, and the risk of taking Celebrex was shown to be, not Celebrex, but one of the other statins was shown to be an increase in heart attacks of 46%.
Yeah.
And an over-the-counter was shown to be a reduction in heart attacks of 25%. I went to my doctor with this information and said, should I be continuing to take this drug? He says, oh, there's another study over here that I believe in that shows the opposite. I wouldn't be concerned about doing that. Now, do I look for a third study? Do I rely on expert advice?
Just listen to what I say and you'll be fine. There are, I actually think that particular study you cited is not a good one. But the idea that you brought up is true. You know, I like coffee. I can show you 8,000 studies that show coffee causes cancer. Coffee causes type A behavior. Coffee is good for you. It prevents you from having cancer. If you have it and go around 3 times in a circle under a moon, you'll never get meningitis. You know, there is a study for anything. So when it comes to really important things, and statins one, because lots of people take them, I think, you know, we're doing big studies, and we need, unfortunately, to wait and see how some of them pan out. And again, you have to look at the risks and the benefits. And a lot of people, I'm not an expert on this stuff, but it's pretty clear that high cholesterol is a very big risk for dying. And if you can bring it down dramatically, and you need to bring it down dramatically, then that's something worth doing for lots of people. Now, who those people are is a matter of endless debate. You know, it used to be that, you know, my cholesterol's kind of low, but every time I go to the doctor, he wants it to be low. You know, we're going to get down because the Japanese have cholesterol of like 1. And they don't have a lot of heart attacks. And so I think ideally we want really low cholesterol, but what are we going to do to get there? Because, you know, I'm not going to give up, you know, Hershey Kisses and stuff like that. No. So it is a question, and it's a difficult one to answer, but I think on the big ticket items, there's a lot of studies going on, and information changes, and our knowledge does change, and sometimes stuff that seemed right isn't right, and we just have to accept that. And that's why I say if anyone can ever show me that homeopathy has ever done anything for anyone ever, I'll be the happiest guy in the world to stand up here and say it isn't the most worthless swindle in all of human history. Okay, one more question. Okay, you win.
My name is Patrick Ewa, and I come here from Ghana. And
sorry about the match.
So yeah, that was a bummer. Quick question, comment about, you know, the environmental ministers in African countries. I think that you oversimplify a bit because there have been examples of interventions in Africa where, you know, an aid organization brings in new fish, you know, a new species that's supposed to be nutritious and so on, stocks a lake, it causes an environmental disaster, it kills all the small fish that the local population was eating, and then they die themselves, and then you have a real problem. And so there are instances like that.
That's true. You're absolutely right.
You know, and that history contributes towards sort of the caution regarding new technologies that come in.
I completely understand.
And then the other thing is, if you're African and you're coming to the United States with organic produce of any kind, the United States Customs will have you remove that food from your box and throw it away.
Right.
Okay? Because they're saying there's a risk by bringing this foreign thing into the United States. So if the environmental ministers experience that at JFK, and then you come to his country and say, well, I'm going to bring this new thing, he's going to scratch his head a little bit and ask about it. And so I think that to address this problem, and it's not an easy question,
but
right?
I think he should scratch his head.
And it shouldn't be, I think that the conversation needs to move away from, oh, you're being irrational or not really understanding risks and benefits, and just be a little more patient and a little more systematic about, you know, explaining.
Look, there was
these technologies.
nothing in recent history more systematic than the attempt in India to get GE brinjal approved. There was no better data, no clearer data, no more conclusive data. It went over 8 years. It went through every regulatory commission in that country. You're absolutely right. We have to look at every example, and if someone's trying to bring something in that doesn't measure up, that seems a little new, that seems like we ought to worry, then every country and every person should say, whoa, let's step back. But all I'm asking in this book and in my life these days is, where do we draw the damn line? Because we have to draw a line somewhere. And with the India example, if that isn't going to be able to go in the ground, I don't know what on this planet we should be putting in the ground. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying we should just blindly import stuff into other countries, because that has proven to be terribly mistaken at times.
And on that note, we do have to wrap up this session. Michael, having read your prose for a number of years, I've always wondered whether your personality matched your prose.
And
I'm glad to say that I was not disappointed. And on behalf of the audience, I think I can say that we enjoyed your presentation very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.